Oliver, welcome to the show. So Oliver is from Enterprise AI's engineering team. He's a generative AI engineer out of our team, and thank you very much for coming along today. And we're going to have a piece at the end of this to talk about what you do, and we'll ask you a few questions about it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Ollie, how we normally talk about this is we do a little bit on what's happening in the market. So anywhere that you'd like to sort of jump in and talk about different things would be great. The sound is still a little bit funky, but we'll play on. Right. So first of all, the first big thing that happened over this last week, well, all the companies came out to play. So Google came out, AWS came out, OpenAI came out with their own enterprise agentic workflow builders. From the perspective of where Gemini or Google and AWS came out with their Quick Suite, both very much focused on trying to compete with Copilot and OpenAI for their ChatGPT style products, but then came out and trying to really push agent builders, pre-built agents, workspace integration, etc. Did you have a go at any of those, Ollie?
We've been using Foundry for a while now, and I know they've just come out with Microsoft Agent Framework, which is quite cool. Bit of an extension on some of the previous frameworks they have. So using things like PromptFlow historically, and now moving towards more agent-based packages, I suppose.
Yeah, very cool stuff. Interestingly enough, though, data is still going to be the issue with all of them, and governance of all that sort of stuff, which I'm sure you've found a bit of interesting times with in the work you've been doing.
Yeah, definitely. Garbage in equals garbage out generally. So getting good data, both for training the models and also like applying the models to business use cases is always a challenge. I think using evaluation suites and those sorts of things is where you can make gains with it.
It's really interesting when you talk about evaluation suites. There's very little ever put down on any of these things, certainly in the enterprise world, from a business perspective about evaluations. And we've spoken about this previously. Evaluations are all about getting a real scientific test going on with AI, because AI is, or generative AI is not deterministic. It's based on probabilities. That means that every single time you ask the same question, you'll probably get a different answer. And making sure that all those answers are somewhat in the same realm of what we're doing is what evaluation is all about, and doing it scientifically. So you do a set of tests that you test over and over again and grow them over time. So yeah, really important and really interesting stuff. So the next part I put on here as well is pricing. So interestingly enough, they've come out with slightly different pricing, sort of very simple, but very slightly different pricing. So as far as I can see, AWS has come out with $20 or $40 tiers per user. Google's come out with $30 a user a month. And then you've got OpenAI and Microsoft Copilot. Well, a lot of Copilot's free. And then you add an extension on that, which I think in the Copilot world in Microsoft is like $25 a month or $30 a month. And then OpenAI I'm not actually sure what OpenAI is. I think OpenAI is $25 a month as well. So they're sort of all playing around, and certainly AWS is playing around with two pricing models there. One at $20 and then enterprise at $40. So we'll see what happens there and whether price actually becomes an issue. I don't know whether something as cheap as effectively as cheap for people in enterprise, at least at $20 a month, is going to make much a big difference, but we'll see.
Yeah, and they do seem to be doing lots of tiers of this pricing. I do wonder how profitable some of them are. But it's interesting to watch them grow and scale. So.
Yeah. And the big valuations are coming off each of these numbers as well. So then we've got Cisco. So I wanted to really look at Cisco because I think it's a really interesting thing that's going on. So we've spoken about this a couple of times on this podcast about the fact that data centers and what happens in data centers and the gigawatts and the power required to do all this is quite a big play. And there's a couple of sort of things going on here. One is that every single time we talk about it, there's an announcement of another big cluster of different size processors to be able to make this work better, certainly across the US. And there's sort of three big areas here. One is the fact that Azure's just turned on a whole new cluster for OpenAI. OpenAI then has come out and said, hey, we're going to be doing this with multiple vendors around the world. And last time we spoke on here, they'd gone with another vendor to open up extra capacity for what they're trying to do. They've just gone again, and OpenAI has just done a deal with AMD to unlock another 6 gigawatts of capacity. Now, how big is that? Look, let's just say it's big. Is there, sort of globally, there's sort of somewhere between 240. I think Azure argues that it's got somewhere like 500 gigawatts of power flowing through. So 6 is not massive, but it certainly gives you a bit of an idea of sort of what's going on there. And then the next piece is where's the power coming from, which is sort of this interesting play, which I'll ask you about in a second, because turning on this power pretty quickly is hard. And then the last one is Cisco's play, which I thought was quite interesting. You may have a comment on this. What Cisco's come out, generally a networking company, for those of you who don't know, Cisco's come out and basically worked out how to connect multiple sites. So one of the issues is if we need a data center here in this region, but I've got a data center here and I've got power here, how can I potentially move some of the workload to a data center where the power is as opposed to a data center that doesn't? And how do we link those two? And Cisco's now come out with a chip that's enabling data to flow at a rate they need to be able to link data centers together and to be able to do training across data centers. So any comments on any of that, Ollie, in terms of what you've seen and sort of interesting things from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I think that's super interesting. They're able to share workloads between data centers. I do think it comes back to like the data centers at the end of the day. Like you're going to have increasingly larger models being trained, which is going to require more data, as we were talking about before, high quality data, but also energy. And, the environmental footprint of some of these models being trained is huge. And, having clean energy, such as like renewables, to power these data centers is going to be increasing in demand, I think. So I do think it's sort of something hiding behind all these generative AI and data centers is the energy that's required to make it all happen.
It's like it's pushing on every single part of the problem areas in the world. We've got clean energy problems, and this is just sort of almost exacerbating that while pushing the need for it. And then we've got all this money to be made around AI, but if we can't get the data centers up and running fast enough, then it's all going to sort of grind to a halt. So yeah, it's an interesting play. So then Europe comes out and says, okay, well, here's $1 billion that we need to spend, which sounds like a big number, but these days $1 billion doesn't sound as big as it used to be. They start talking in $1 trillion and $500 billion sort of numbers these days. But EU's come out with a $1 billion apply AI strategy to try and push along things. And then OpenAI at the same time is pressing, OpenAI seems to be everywhere, pressing, or certainly this week,
Definitely.
Pressing the EU on competition. So turning around and basically saying, look, your regulation is going to kill the growth of AI. It's killing our growth of AI in EU. So what are you going to do about it? It's a really interesting place. And then finally, telemetry. So in the last little while, there's been this whole thing. When we first started with generative AI, there was this concept of, if you hand over your data into a ChatGPT prompt, then ChatGPT learns off it. And there was discussion around people had lost code and source code and valuable source code to companies like ChatGPT or OpenAI. Now we're actually having reports coming out about how many times just normal people are putting really sensitive data into a prompt and either not thinking about it or not knowing about it. And it's a really interesting place where these reports are now coming out and saying how much people are actually putting private data into prompts that could go potentially anywhere. This week has been a lot about all the things we've heard about in the past, but it's even lifted again, where 4 big companies come out with what's going on. We've got fairly large changes on trying to get data centers talking to each other. We've got EU starting to throw around money and then being told that if they don't do more of that and faster, then they're going to be left behind. And then finally, the reports are actually coming out and describing how much people are losing information into the, I won't call it the metaverse, but the AI verse, shall we say, and where it's going and who's going to use it. So like it's just the news, maybe it's only interesting to us and everybody on the podcast will say, God, you guys are boring with your news. But I mean, it's when you start to think about how far this stuff is going and how quickly it's moving, every week is massive discussions in the news. So the world's moving really fast, Ollie. You've been with Enterprise AI now, if I shift gears to you, for about 14 months, have I got that right?
Yeah, about that.
About 14 months. So what's it like being in a fairly fast-moving, or maybe not, maybe you tell me it's moving too slowly for you, Enterprise AI business?
Yeah, look, I think it's definitely fast-paced, and I really enjoy that. It's quite strange because we're encountering a lot of problems for the first time. So, I'll go look for the answer, and more often than not, someone's either come across that problem like 3 weeks ago for the first time, or no one's come across it at all. And I think being on the frontier is really interesting and motivating, to be honest. But yeah, I think like it's a startup at the end of the day, and having all those sort of startup culture factors play into the job makes it really enjoyable.
Give me some ideas of startup culture.
Startup culture.
Give me two tough ones and two good ones. How about that? Have you got those, or just one of each would do for a start?
Yeah, I'd say a good one is like working quite late and grabbing a bit of pizza. So, staying here with the team, grinding out before a deadline and just getting it over the line to make everyone happy is normally a pretty good feeling.
Yep.
One that's a bit tough, I would say, is it's a good question. I'd say moving fast is quite tough because you find yourself backtracking fairly regularly because Microsoft or Amazon have just released something that changes the game. Similarly, you might have thought that the world was heading one way and you find out it's heading actually a different way. So yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, and I think that they make the difficulty setting a bit harder.
Got it. Can you give me an example of some of those things that are changing?
Yeah, for sure. So I think agent frameworks are a really good one. A few years ago, everyone was just learning about LLMs for the first time, and people figured out if you put a few of them together, you can make workflows. And workflows are a bit more useful than just a chat interface, right? With a workflow, you can start to realize business value and et cetera. But I think in the last couple in the last couple of months, and maybe even the last year, agents have had a really big push, and that's because the capability of these models, the context windows, the context management has all got a lot better. And seeing the progression of software development kits from literally like REST APIs talking to ChatGPT, now at the age of, now gone through workflow development toolkits and now at agent development toolkits, it's interesting to see how the industry is moving forward and where these big players think it's going to go. So a great example, I think, is the new software development kits coming out of OpenAI. As you know, their dev day was this week, and they released an extension of their GPTs, their custom GPTs. You can now integrate apps such as like Spotify and Figma and stuff into their platform. And it's interesting because they're making a bet, in a sense, on where the ecosystem's going to go and where they're going. And, that sort of stuff just wasn't around 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, I think that's quite exciting.
And so what are some of the things that you're thinking about or have connected to in these extra apps or these pieces that you're connecting?
Well, it seems that they keep abstracting more and more. So what do I mean by that is there's less low-level tools and they're giving you more pre-built tools effectively, which makes development easier, reduces the barrier to entry, but also I don't know how I feel about it just yet. I've got to spend a bit more time with the new releases. It could go, it could go well, but I think at the end of the day, you always want to have as much control as you can if you're low level and focusing on the details.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about that, because you're being an engineer these days, and specifically a Gen AI engineer, it's changed a lot over the last 12 to 14 months with all this stuff you're talking about.
Definitely.
How's it feel in terms of maybe that low level management or control or understanding, like you're handing over control a lot, or you have to, or you're deciding whether you have to. So can you talk a little bit through that and sort of your thought about what it's like being a developer or an engineer and what you thought you were going to be doing versus what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I think there's it's an interesting question because, especially for us, because we're in a fast-paced environment, we don't have the luxury of time, effectively. And what that means is you have to be optimal about everything you do. And I think, with these agentic coding tools that have come out recently, there's an optimal amount of code for them to write and an optimal amount of supervision for them to have. So I think just handing over the keys to the kingdom and saying, hey, Claude Code, can you build this for me? You're going to be putting a lot of like brain power and decision making on the LLM, which in itself is probably about the level of a junior engineer and doesn't have as much context and understanding as employees would. So on one hand, it has those features, but it can also write really good code really quickly. So I think there's an optimal amount of supervision you have to have, and it's only in the last couple of weeks that I've really been delving into that and picking it up.
Yeah, we've been trying to work out what the right analogy for this is, right? Like there's we saw that graph that I think you brought to the team, which was sort of, you get improvements over the first little bit and then it dies, and then you sort of sit in this well of despair for a while, and then suddenly you start getting better at it, or the AI starts to understand what you want. We even heard from Gareth. So Gareth, who maybe will be able to work out how to do a podcast, is actually in Singapore, and we're in Sydney at the moment. But Gareth was telling us that although he's our designer and he used to work most of his time in Figma, and we're not trying to have a go with Figma here, by the way, but he used to spend most of his time in Figma. Now he spends most of his time in a Claude prompt, and he is talking design to a Claude prompt that's then building it. So, he'll say things like, design me a screen with 4 boxes across the top in this color and use Shad CN or whatever it is. And then it'll do it. And then it'll say, okay, now move the boxes from 5 pixels apart to 3 pixels apart. And so rather than actually doing anything with his mouse, he hasn't touched his mouse as a designer in 3 months. I mean, it's crazy, right?
It's definitely changing the way we work. Yeah. And, I think that's only going to, it's impacting developers and people that are close to tech first, but it will trickle down to everyone else. Yeah. And I think that it's going to be, it's a real enabler at the end of the day. Like, you can do more if you have that assistance with you.
Yeah, look, I was thinking the other day, I think it was on the weekend actually, I was doing something, thinking to myself, what this agentic coding is like walking along a path with forks in the road every time you ask the prompt to ask the thing to do something next. And at every fork, you need to make a decision after you've picked right or left, whether or not you've gone the right way. And sometimes you'll walk down the right-hand fork for, past a whole lot of forks. Yeah. And you realise you have to come back 10 forks, forks in the road, to actually go back to this point and say that's where we went wrong. That's where we started diverting off the path and getting it wrong and that's hard. That's the classic 2 steps forward, 1 step back sort of idea. Which we're all trying to get used to and work out how to work. So, right. So you're 14 months in. What have you delivered? What are you most proud about what you've delivered so far?
That's a good question. I'd say it was probably my work on intent a couple months ago. So we had this problem where we had a chatbot, and it was powered by an LLM, and we basically had to have it reliably choose between like a lot of tools. I'm going to call them tools. There was something else, but like it's more or less the same. And getting it to pick like the right tool when the tools are very similar, like 99.9% of the time, was a real challenge. We had about 100 tools, I'd say. So there were no tool descriptions, nothing like that. We tried to keep it fast and super accurate. And just through different engineering patterns, we were able to do it.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I think, that system is like super reliable, which is uncharacteristic of most LLMs.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. And that was a combination of sort of AI, Gen AI, probabilistic, and then just real coding and coding patterns. Is that sort of how you did it?
It was mainly through different patterns of LLM. So doing operations in sequence or in parallel, but making sure they're all executing super quickly, optimized with the right models, and it was pretty cool.
So you're telling me there is still some engineering skill required in this job? Is that what you're saying?
I think it comes back to it actually relates quite closely to electrical engineering, what I was doing. So I think it was quite cool.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's still worth. There you go. You've heard it here first. There's still worthwhile going to do a course at university these days.
There you go.
Excellent. Thanks, Ollie. Thanks very much. We'll probably wrap it up with that. We try and keep this short so that people can listen to it without having to get too bored with our voices. So thank you very much for the time, and thank you all to everybody out there, and we'll see you next week.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers.